Hello everyone and welcome to another video in the GameStorm EDU series. Today we're going to be talking about how to develop good objectives and how to align that objective with your game goal. You can always head to GameStormEDU.com to learn more about these topics. And if you want to follow along, you can make your own copy of the Game Designer template found at GameStormEDU.com under the Resources for Creating Games tab. So if you make a copy of that, you'll be able to make your own example and iteration of your game while following along to this video. So we're talking about objectives, or how do I win? Objectives are absolutely crucial. Your players need to know what they need to do to reach their win condition. Are you playing against your fellow players or competitors? Are you playing as a team towards a common goal? What are you trying to do in order to get a victory? Think about the objective in terms of writing as your thesis. When you're designing a game, you're actually having everything you do lead back up to that objective. So every part of your game, how it works, the pieces, they all have something to do with getting back to that objective. Anything that's in your game that really doesn't help people get towards that objective maybe can be cut. You want to think about it too like backwards design, starting with the end in mind. So actually decide what would be a logical objective first as you're designing your game. Then work out the mechanics, the items, the physical assets of your game later on. Start with that end goal and work forward from there. So some examples of objectives. You might be having players try to build the best society. Maybe using math to eliminate enemies. Maybe they're trying to keep a food chain in balance, or even make the most persuasive argument. These would be examples of objectives that fit in with social studies, mathematics, language arts, and science. An example of a game with one of these objectives in action would be Knights of the Numeracy Table, which you can check out in the GameStorm EDU library. And in that game, you're working together cooperatively to defeat all the monsters using your particular card deck. An example from our game GameStormers would be to build the best board game. That's the objective. You can either make the most popular board game as determined by your fellow players, or the game that has the most victory points in it. So that would be an example of objectives for that game. So the difference between objectives and goals is the objective is kind of how people win and the ultimate piece we're working towards. A goal of your game might be something you want the game to do, but isn't necessarily something the players need to do to win. It's just a personal goal you have as the designer. So for example, in GameStormers, one of the goals was to introduce players to different types of games within this one game, show them different game styles to help them understand there's a variety of different games out there. An example of a game with another goal is Dead of Winter has multiple objectives for people to reach. So one of the goals the designers might have had was, how does a player balance a team goal with a personal goal? How do you navigate whether to work towards the team goal, your goal, both at the same time? How do you win when you're trying to balance these two things? An example of a game that has a really good objective, but maybe not a great overall goal of the game, would be Candyland. Candyland has a great objective. Get to the ultimate candy kingdom at the end, right? The problem is the goals of the game aren't really clear. You just draw colors and they go to that color. If the goal maybe was to develop a game that's really easy for young kids, that maybe they succeeded. But overall, designing a complex and interesting game with interesting choices, not so much for Candyland. Now, how about bad objectives but a good goal? Mousetrap is an example of a game where the objective is really hazy. Like, I want to get to the end, but it's kind of not clear as you set up Mousetrap what all of this physical components to the games do. But the goal of having a really interesting game board and really interesting dynamic to Mousetrap definitely comes through. So Mousetrap maybe had the goal of just being a very engaging experience maybe to set up, but maybe not a great game objective where it's not clear how I achieve a win in it. Another example of a game like this I like to talk about is 13 Dead End Drive. Another game that has a beautiful game board, really interesting, things that you can do. You can spring traps on your fellow players, but the objective of being the last player standing is a little murky, hazy. Why would I specifically go to these dangerous areas on the game board that are really fascinating but not really practical for me to go near? It makes that objective hard to win when we all know, avoid the pitfalls of this game, right? So very fascinating game goal of making this engaging board, this interactive board, but maybe not a great objective. An example in GameStormers, when I was developing the GameStormers game, is I had some game mechanics that didn't meet my goal of having everybody develop a game or meeting that objective of let's build the best game we can. It had some mechanics that were mean to other players, like the Scarecrow prevented players from going to a location. The Dragon allowed you to move characters off of a location. And even the Mysterious Figure took cards away from a player. So you could ruin a player's game. And while those mechanics might make sense in another game where you can kind of negatively affect other players, it didn't really fit the overall objectives and goals that I had as a game designer. So that's an example where I had to revise my game to better fit the objectives and the goals I had. I had to change these cards, actually. And now, as we wrap up this video, it's your turn. Your turn to brainstorm an objective for a potential game you can make. Good luck.